While the adults hesitated, a boy in a patched uniform knelt beside the breathless elderly woman to help her. What happened when the ambulance arrived left everyone in silence. Elias stepped out of his public school late in the afternoon. The weather in Dallas was hot, and the air felt heavy against his face. He wore a worn school uniform, with a few patches where the fabric had worn thin. Under his arm, he carried his old notebook. Cars passed on the street, and people hurried by. The sounds of engines, car horns, and voices mixed together. Elias tried to ignore the discomfort and focus on walking home. He was 13, thin, with dark skin and watchful eyes. He understood that people rarely noticed him. He also knew that his family did not have much money. His clothes were old and his school supplies were limited, but he studied hard, going over lessons in his head as he walked. His mother, who worked long hours as a cashier, always encouraged him to do his best. She wanted him to be prepared for opportunities that might come later. Elias and his mother lived alone in a small apartment. His father had left years ago, and Elias still felt the absence. He knew his mother worked hard to pay the bills and keep them stable. He didn't ask her for anything unless it was truly necessary. He hoped that one day he could improve their situation. Until then, he accepted the challenges as they were. As he walked, he thought about how his mother had taught him basic first aid. She had shown him how to help someone breathe better if they were in trouble. He had never needed to apply this knowledge before, but he remembered the steps clearly. She said it was important to know these things because you never knew when you might need them. The streets of Dallas felt busy and indifferent. Elias had seen plenty of people ignore those in need. He wondered if he would have the courage to help if he ever faced such a situation. He tried not to dwell on it too much, because he could not imagine being in such a position anytime soon. He passed a few shops and turned onto a quieter street. The heat made the pavement hot under his shoes. He clutched his notebook tightly and prepared himself for the final stretch home. As he turned another corner, he noticed a small group of adults gathered ahead. They seemed focused on something near the curb. Elias got closer and saw that an elderly woman was sitting on the edge of the sidewalk. The woman was holding her chest and breathing in shallow, quick bursts. She looked like she was having difficulty staying upright. Some people stood around watching, but no one stepped forward. They whispered among themselves, uncertain of what to do. Elias's heart beat faster. He was only a boy. He didn't know if he should get involved. But as he watched the woman struggle, he remembered what his mother had taught him. He knew how to help someone who had trouble breathing. He felt fear, but also a responsibility to try. He approached slowly, and the adults parted to let him pass. They looked surprised that a child dared to come forward. Elias knelt beside the elderly woman and spoke softly. He asked if she could hear him. The woman nodded, but did not speak. Elias saw the pain and fear in her eyes. He told someone in the crowd to call an ambulance. A woman finally reached for her phone and dialed the emergency number. Meanwhile, Elias tried to help the woman lie down carefully. He remembered to encourage slow, steady breaths and to speak in a calm tone. The woman attempted to follow Elias's instructions, though she still struggled. Elias suspected she might be having a heart problem. He thought about the steps his mother had explained. Keep the person comfortable, keep them talking if possible, and reassure them that help was coming. Elias did his best, even though he felt nervous and uncertain. Around them, the adults watched with mixed reactions. Some looked ashamed that they had not acted first. Others seemed unsure if Elias was doing the right thing. Elias ignored their doubts. He focused on the elderly woman's breathing and tried to keep her calm. Time passed slowly as Elias waited for the ambulance. He had never been in a situation like this before. He wanted to believe that he was helping, but he also worried that he might not be doing enough. Still, he stayed by the woman's side, feeling the heat from the pavement and the tension in the air. After what felt like a long wait, Elias heard sirens in the distance. The crowd shifted, and a few people stepped back, allowing the emergency team to approach. Elias looked up and saw the flashing lights. He took a deep breath, relieved that professionals were finally arriving. He hoped they could save the woman's life. When the paramedics arrived, They quickly assessed the elderly woman's condition. They spoke in calm, controlled voices and asked Elias to step aside so they could do their job. Elias stood up and backed away, letting them work. He watched as they checked her pulse, placed her on a stretcher and prepared her for transport. The crowd grew quiet. The sirens still echoed in Elias's ears. Within minutes, the ambulance pulled away. Elias stood there, unsure of what to feel. He was relieved that help had arrived, but also worried about the woman's condition. Had he done enough? He couldn't answer that question. The adults around him began to leave. A few nodded at him, but no one said much. Elias turned around and started walking home. He felt tired. He usually reached home at about the same time his mother did, but today he was late. He hurried through the streets, thinking about the event. He had never expected to face such a moment. He wondered if the woman would survive. Reaching the small apartment, Elias found it empty. His mother was still at work. He set his notebook on the table and noticed a few dishes in the sink. He washed them, trying to clear his head. He wanted to focus on something ordinary for a few minutes. Later that night, his mother returned, looking exhausted as usual. Elias greeted her and helped her with her bag. She asked how his day was. He hesitated for a moment and then told her the whole story. He explained how he had found an elderly woman struggling to breathe, how no one stepped forward, and how he tried to help until the ambulance came. His mother listened carefully. She placed a hand on his arm and said she was proud of him. She reminded him that acting in an emergency was not easy, especially for someone his age. She said it took courage to remember what he had learned and to use it when it mattered most. Hearing this comforted Elias. He realized that no matter how uncertain he felt, he had tried his best. They spoke briefly about their own challenges. Money was still tight, and his mother worried about the bills. Elias knew this was normal for their household. He hoped that his good grades and careful effort would lead him to a better future. He wanted to support his mother and himself one day. Before going to bed, he said goodnight, feeling a bit more at ease. That night, Elias lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He could not sleep easily. He kept seeing the elderly woman's face. He wondered if she was stable now, if doctors were helping her recover. Elias had no way to find out. He felt both proud and worried. He knew he had done something important, but he also understood that there were limits to what he could do. In the morning, Elias ate a small breakfast and headed to school. As he walked, he noticed that nothing looked different. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. The traffic, the shops, and the people were all the same. It felt strange that something so serious had occurred only a short distance from where he now walked. At school, Elias tried to focus on his classes. He took notes and answered a few questions. During lunch, he sat alone, which was normal for him. He kept thinking about the event. He felt different, as if he had crossed a line between thinking about emergencies and actually facing one. He realized that what he had done the previous day mattered, even if no one at school knew. When school ended, Elias followed his usual route home. He passed the same residential street where it had happened. The spot where the crowd stood was empty now. There were no signs that anyone had been there. He paused for a moment, looking around, wondering if he should ask someone about the woman. Everyone nearby seemed to be going about their business. He decided to continue walking. Reaching home, Elias went through his tasks. He tried to study and do homework, but it was hard to concentrate. He felt restless, waiting for news that he knew might never come. Later, his mother arrived. She asked if he had learned anything new. He shook his head. She told him to be patient. Hospitals followed rules, and information about patients was not always easy to get. Elias understood. He also understood that his life had not suddenly changed because of one brave act. The bills still needed to be paid, and his mother still worked long hours. He was still a boy with limited resources. But now he knew something about himself. He knew he could act under pressure. He had proven something to himself, even if he was not sure what it meant for the future. That evening, Elias tried to distract himself by reviewing school materials. He thought about applying the same effort he used when helping that woman to his studies. Maybe if he worked just as hard, he could build a better future. He considered that helping people might be something he should do again. Knowing basic first aid had made a difference once. Maybe it would again. As he got ready for bed, Elias felt a mixture of uncertainty and quiet confidence. He had stepped forward when no one else did. He had stayed calm and focused. He knew that he would carry this memory with him. He closed his eyes, still wondering if the woman was alive, but also accepting that he had done all he could.